welcome to Tales from the Bridge. In this episode, Marty and myself sit down with Jamie Anderson, the son of Jerry Anderson, who created so many amazing, important science fiction television shows like Thunderbirds, Space 1999, so much more. So what a great conversation we have. Jamie tells us some beautiful stories. We really hope you enjoy this episode. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge. The Bridge with Jamie Anderson today. Jamie is a producer, director, and writer known for his work on the Doctor Who and Terrahawks audio plays, and for his work as he continues to keep the flame alive and carry on the legacy of his late father, Jerry Anderson. Jerry is the genius filmmaker behind beloved television shows such as Thunderbirds, Stingray, Captain Scarlet, UFO, and my personal favorite, Space 1999. To find out all the latest, visit jerryanderson.com. And for the podcast listeners out there, you can listen to Jamie host the Jerry Anderson podcast. Jamie, we are so happy to have you join us today. Welcome to the Bridge.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. And what a lovely intro. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I have to say, you have a lot going on right now. And when I visit the website, it's extremely active. And there's a lot of new releases, a lot of news. There's a new UFO book that just came out, and there was a Space 1999 book not too long ago. Can you tell us about these?
I certainly can. I mean, in the UK, to me, most people, Jerry Anderson means puppets. Right. Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, Stingray, but there's an amazing kind of transatlantic divide in terms of the shows that really made it. And like you said, Space 1999 is the main one that got it into the US and Canada. And so you say Anderson here, they'll instantly go into doing really awkward marionette impressions and terrible impressions of the countdown intro. But Space 1999 is kind of the second jewel in the crown, I guess. So we know there's a lot of love out there for it, and as well as kind of celebrating the existing stuff that's already out there, the episodes, and there's not that many. There's only 48 episodes of Space 1999, for example. We're trying our best to expand those things. So we work with a company in the UK called Big Finish, who you may know of, who do kind of cult audio dramas, extending the worlds of those kind of forgotten shows in many cases, or certainly the older ones like classic Doctor Who. They've been doing Space 1999 audio dramas. So we knew that there was desire for stuff around space. And obviously, if I say to you Space 1999, probably the first image that will pop into your head, if you're honest, I think will be an Eagle transporter, the iconic spaceship. If you're trying to be cool, you might say Maya maybe, or possibly Barbara Bain. But I'm pretty sure for most people it's the Eagle because it's an iconic piece of technology. Mm-hmm. And so we decided we wanted to explore that, really. Back in the late 70s, David Hirsch did a technical notebook, which many people may remember as kind of red plastic folder with the gold embossed Moonbase Alpha logo on the front with a guide to all the sort of stuff behind the scenes. And we wanted to do a bigger, more exciting version of that book. And so I worked with one of the guys on the team here, Chris Thompson, who created hundreds of new illustrations, creating what is basically an in-universe guide to Moonbase Alpha. If you guys had just had your call-up notice to join the World Space Commission and you were joining the 311 people who lived on Moonbase Alpha in the fictional 1999, this is the book you would be given to get you ready to live on the moon. That went down incredibly well. People loved it. And so we've done the same for UFO. And UFO was the kind of the precursor to Space 1999 in many ways. But it's just amazing how much you can mine any of these shows for cool stuff, for cool visuals, for cool atmosphere, stories and stuff to immerse you in it.
Well, I see on the webpage too right now they're advertising costumes for Halloween for the marionette costumes. That's great. Great idea.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Terrahawks fan, a lesser known one, that did a little bit of airtime in Canada for sure. Then Zelda from Terrahawks, who is a sort of 100-plus-year-old android space witch, utterly terrifying. There's a mask for her. So we cover everything because Dad produced 18 series in his career.
Wow.
Directed all sorts of other stuff too, plus 4 feature films. So there's a huge amount of content there, and almost for as many shows there are different variants of fan of those shows. So it's a lot of different audiences to keep nourished as much as we can do anyway.
Well, my first exposure to Space 1999 would have been young child, and I think my brother and I, it was either a garage sale or a flea market. We found a stack of Space 1999 trading cards.
Oh, nice.
And we were just like, well, what is this? And I remember we were looking at them just, 8, 9 years old, like sorting out our cards. And then figured out, oh, wait, this was a TV show, but it wasn't really on in Canada at the time. Maybe it was, but at an obscure time that a 9-year-old wouldn't know. Yeah. That was my first exposure to Space 1999, not knowing that Thunderbirds, which was on a channel that we could watch, that it was the same studio, and that your father was behind that. So to learn that later on was amazing. That we've got the same mind creating these really neat science fiction shows.
Because they are very different. I mean, they share some kind of positive view of the future and what we can do, what mankind could do, even in challenging circumstances, be they, terrible disasters on Earth in Thunderbirds or a terrible disaster afflicting the entire moon in Space 1999. But, it always amazes me how different people find the shows. Some people through trading cards. There's a huge amount of handing down to the next generation. I don't know if you tried handing down Space 1999 to your kids. I'm not sure it'll be that successful now, but there are plenty of 10, 11, 12-year-olds who are finding these shows from the 60s and 70s and falling in love with them, which is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. But they're very, very different, and the pacing's very different, and I wonder, some kids find that difficult at a young age, but once they get to be older kids, then it becomes easier because you're looking at something very vintage, and some people just want something like that's real and not animated or computerized.
True. There's something in the tangible. But I mean, I had a neighbor a few years ago whose 4-year-old son wouldn't sit down for anything, wouldn't sit still for 5 minutes, and she put an episode of Thunderbirds on. Those episodes are 50 minutes long, 50 minutes, and he stood 3 feet back from the television and watched the entire 50 minutes, stood rooted to the spot. Yeah. So even at 4, for a kid that's used to kind of frenetic entertainment, there's still something captivating.
For sure. Cool. Well, I do remember, so my dad was a kid in the 60s, so he watched Thunderbirds. But yeah, I remember the first time watching it, and my dad saying, this is a show I used to watch, so you kind of get that, oh, no, Dad. And then he put on Thunderbirds, and I remember being immediately amazed, where there was this aspect of cinematography that captured a whole scene, you could get a whole set in one shot better than most of the TV shows that could, because if you're dealing with humans, now you got to have a realistic shot, a big studio to show these big walls and ceilings, and there's an advantage to the puppetry and super marionation of these shows, because you can see everything around it. And it kind of blew my mind. And even when I put on an episode now to show the kids Thunderbirds or Stingray or any of these shows, I still get that little bit of, why does this look so good? Like, how does it look so good? And I am just wondering, because we are about the same age. And for yourself, do you remember seeing these for the first time, or were they always there? And what was, when you clued in on your participation to what was to these, to your father's work, or just being there to see what he did? what was that like, and do you remember?
So I was born in 1985, so I missed the heyday, in inverted commas. He had just made the first series of Terrorhawks when I was born, and there hadn't yet been the big resurgence in the UK of the shows, but they still had cult status. And so my earliest memories are of VHS tapes on the shelf at home, and they kind of looked exciting. They had these really dramatic paintings. In fact, one of them was a green VHS cover for the Thunderbirds story Attack of the Alligators. So there's a giant kind of snaking alligator looking very vicious, and a human-ish character. And I think remember as a kid looking at those and thinking, these look interesting, weird, but interesting. Mum let me watch them. And I watched Thunderbirds, Terrorhawks, Captain Scarlet, Stingray a lot when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And then one day she said to me, you know, your father made those. And as a kid, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, you have no understanding of how television is made or what it even means. It's just there. You just watch stuff. There's no, like, how did this come to be? So my understanding of that as a child was he designed and made the cases that the VHS tapes were in. So it took me a little bit longer to really understand what it meant. But then in 1991, in the UK, the BBC, our main broadcaster, re-showed Thunderbirds in its entirety. And suddenly there was Thunderbirds mania. And my friends at school were watching Thunderbirds, and they knew that Dad had made it. And I was kind of coming to understand what that meant. But also their parents were re-watching it, and they were bringing annuals to school for me to take home and get signed. So for a very brief period of my childhood, my friends and their parents thought that my dad was cool. Which is, most people never get that, right? So it was very exciting and kind of intoxicating to see and begin to understand the process of taking an idea and making it real so that other people can experience it as well. Because it's one thing putting words on a page and letting the reader do the work, but this seemed somehow more exciting. And then in 94, 95, off the back of the success of Thunderbirds and it giving him a sort of a name again, because there had been some wilderness years for him where he couldn't get projects away, he raised the funding to make a show called Space Precinct, which was a kind of Hill Street Blues in space, I think was the comp pitch for it. And for that, I got to spend every summer holiday, half-term waking moment at Pinewood Studios on the sets or in the model shop or in the creature shop on this live-action sci-fi show. And that was amazing. Ted Shackelford was the lead in that from Knots Landing. So they shipped in the American stars. It was quite a big budget. It was, in hindsight, I can see an enormously troubled production. But even on that show, he had Christine Glanville working for him. Now, Christine's not a name that you would recognise, but Christine was the lead puppeteer on Thunderbirds. And 30 years later, she was still working for him. And there were loads of people on that production who were working for him who'd been doing so for decades. So this incredible sense of loyalty and desire to get involved in an Anderson production. So that was a really amazing atmosphere. And then seeing the tips and the tricks that they had been handed down, because so many people in the industry, in the special effects industry in particular, had cut their teeth on Anderson shows. And so in the UK, you know, every explosion, every great model that you saw, any amazing effect sequence probably had its roots in Anderson. So it was a really exciting time and an exciting experience, and kind of set me on a path really where I didn't really want to do anything else. He didn't want me to be in the industry at all under any circumstances, but I wanted to, because I mean, what's cooler than taking a cool idea and sharing that cool idea with the world.
That's amazing. What a great story. Wow. Did you also grow up with any memorabilia from his shows? Like, did you have any of the puppets or any of that stuff?
So, yes and no. He has been described as the least nostalgic man you could ever meet.
Oh.
So really, I did have 2 puppets in the house, Penelope and Parker from Thunderbirds.
Oh, wow.
However, they were in a wardrobe, in bin bags, just hanging from clothes hangers. They weren't on display. They were just sort of kept away in the dark. And he had very few bits of memorabilia around the house because he was always moving forward. Mm-hmm. You know, once one show was done, it would take you on to the next. He's like, okay, well, this project, let's say Fireball XL5, is kind of one of his first major steps into sci-fi in the early 60s. Once that was done, put it to one side, park it, done. He didn't keep any models, he didn't keep scripts, because it was all about the next show. So then it was on to Stingray, and as Stingray was coming to the end of its run, forget everything there, it's on to Thunderbirds. And so it was always the same throughout his entire life. So when he had done Terrorhawks, there were a couple of little mementos of the fact that he'd actually created this series of 39 episodes, but it was on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. So a distinct lack. So all the kind of the Anderson paraphernalia and joy of the physical stuff that I saw was on set at different places. So if he was working at Bray Studios or Pinewood or Shepperton, wherever he was working, I would try and hang around, being an awkward child and the boss's son. So the most irritating mixture you can possibly imagine for the people working for him, basically.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. Like, you've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Amazing. So he didn't like nostalgia, but created one of the most nostalgic things of all time when it comes to British television.
It's so weird, isn't it? Because you don't set out, I don't think any creative sets out to think, I want people to look back on this fondly and remember their child. It's about people being entertained and excited at the time it's made, so he wasn't setting out to do that. We made a documentary which was released earlier in the year about his life. And something that I came to realize through that is that in order for us to have nostalgia, we must have warmth and joy and pleasure in our childhoods that we want to revisit. And the incredibly sad thing, but the thing that probably catalyzed him to do what he did, is that I don't think he had any joy in his childhood. Very, very little indeed. He grew up as a child of the war. His hero in his life, his only hero, his only real friend, was his brother who was killed during the war. His parents had a terrible relationship. He didn't have any toys or friends as a kid. In fact, his first toys were bought for him by the prostitute that lived downstairs after he'd been in hospital for 3 weeks with measles. And she felt sorry for him. So that's the kind of life he grew up with. So I really think, I don't know if it's a medical term, probably not, but I think he was a-nostalgic. He did not know what it was. He never appreciated it. He almost couldn't experience nostalgia himself. So when people would say to him, oh, the shows mean so much to me, such a great childhood, I still watch them now. To him, it was a bit like, well, why would you spend any time looking back? To him, his life was all about looking forward. But I think without that terrible childhood, he wouldn't have been so driven to create the worlds on screen that he did create. You know, these utopian, forward-looking worlds with amazing tech and gadgetry and heroes doing selfless, wonderful things. He was sort of painting the world that was missing in his childhood. So it's, you know, it's thanks to the fact that he couldn't enjoy looking back that we get to enjoy looking back now.
That's another amazing story. Is this documentary you're talking about? Is this where there's a deep fake of your father?
Yes, which he would have loved. So the documentary is called Jerry Anderson: A Life Uncharted, and I believe there's a North American release due later in the year. And yes, we had access to 80 hours of candid audio interview with his biographer. So it was audio that was never intended to be released. And you see a lot of documentary type content where audio is overlaid with text and subtitles and captions and cutaway. And I just think the human element, if you're watching something, seeing the person is such a big part of it. The director, Benjamin Field, suggested that we could use deepfake to create the footage accompanying the audio. And so we did. I mean, Dad would have loved it because he was always looking for the next big thing, the next technology to use in a creative way. But that's the terrible sadness there, is that in order for us to need to use deepfake, he has to not be here. So it's the kind of the final step creatively and use of technology for Jerry Anderson. Which is a kind of a beautiful thing to do. A very strange experience for me, I have to say. And I think I might be, well, certainly one of the first humans ever to experience a loved one being recreated in that way.
Wow, that's incredible.
It was a very strange thing. We spent a day at Pinewood Studios, which is where his ashes are, because it was his second home. And I don't know how much you know about deepfake or how it's created, or how much your listeners might know. And audio is definitely a tricky medium to explain a very visual process. Mm-hmm. But essentially, we had a body and face double who stood in for him, and then a computer was taught what Dad's face looked like from every angle, and then the computer overlaid his face over our actor's face, over the body double's face. And we spent a day with the body double, whose name was Rolly Hyde. And Rolly, at a distance, I mean, even of a few feet for me, because I've not got great eyesight, looked quite a lot like Dad, and it was very spooky. And being stood on the bridge over the lake at Pinewood Studios, where his ashes are, watching this man playing my father, my brain was doing its very own deepfake thing. So that was the start, actually, quite early on in the process of learning much more about him and coming to understand a lot more about why he made the shows he did, how he did it, what drove him, and what inspired the ideas that we're now here talking about. I mean, he was born in 1929. Here we are, getting on for a century later from his birth, talking about shows in a nostalgic way, which he wasn't capable of doing himself. So it's an amazing set of circumstances, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
Well, let's kind of zero in on technology for a minute here. One question we'd like to talk about with guests is the importance of science fiction, and I mean, it's a medium that lends itself to philosophy, religion, everything, and. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think science fiction does for society as a whole, or just as entertainment?
I mean, just as entertainment, it's great escapism. I'm all for that. But I meet so many people whose lives have been transformed by entering into the world of science fiction. And then those people often have changed others' lives in turn. And when I say that, I mean people who have gone into working in specific fields like medicine and robotics and AI, plenty at NASA and at the European Space Agency and beyond, who are there because they watched science fiction on the screen and they were captivated by it. And maybe they thought this is already on the way to happening when they were watching it, or maybe they thought this is already happening somewhere really, and to discover it wasn't. I think science fiction creates that tension between experience and the real world, and makes people want to bring the two together. And I think that utopian science fiction is so powerful in that respect, because it allows people to see a picture of what the world might be. And if they're so compelled to do so, they can start to bring the world towards that vision. I think there's something around the volume of dystopian science fiction over the last 30, 40 years has got a lot to answer for, in a way, because either you're drawn towards a vision or you're repelled by it, and I think whatever the force, it can be equally entertaining, which is why dystopian stuff, you can go crazier, you can go more wild, because a dystopian world gives its own dramatic tension, whereas actually you have to work harder, I would say, in a utopian science fiction setting to bring the drama. It's more effort in a lot of ways. So I'm hoping we're going to see a return to more utopian stuff, because I think we could really do with some right now. We could do with some North Star resetting for humanity in terms of its consumption of entertainment and science fiction. So any attempt, any way we can make people experience more stuff, more Anderson-esque stuff, or anything in that area, anything in the kind of the solar punk region of looking at these brighter futures, I think will only do us a favor. And they're still just as entertaining when they're done right.
More optimism, more hope.
Yeah,
It's interesting what you said too about always, the science fiction inspires people by making them want to move forward into that vision, and that's exactly what you just told us your dad was like, right? Always looking forward, always moving on to the next thing.
He was, but he wasn't doing it in a kind of, oh, I want to create this, and then maybe people will be inspired to do it. It was kind of inbuilt, which then makes it more authentic, doesn't it? It's when we try and reverse engineer things, like, well, we want people to reach, this point over here. How do we make this work? I mean, so for example, a few years ago, I'm sure this isn't classified information, but if it is, I'm sure I'll get a knock at the door. There was a White House funded program which brought together writers and scientists and producers and creatives, which I was involved with, basically to set out a shared vision of the next 300, 400, 500 years and for how we might move out into the solar system. That program was sadly canned with the previous administration.
Shocking.
But it was a very exciting time when we could all get together and share these amazing things that might be happening. And I wish there were more things like that going on. We don't have to say, this is the plan for humanity, here's the narrative to get there, but to have a collection of thoughts about where we might be in 100, 200, 300, 500 years' time, with people who are actively trying to make the world better. That felt like a really great melting pot. So let's hope something like that gets reintroduced at some point, because I think it could only do good.
I think was David Brin a part of that group? I feel like
Yes.
David Brin was talking about that. Yeah,
He was indeed, yes.
Yeah,
remember that, Marty?
Maybe Carl Schrader too. We talked to a lot of science fiction authors, and they're always moonlighting as futurists for various organizations, from the military to the government to private corporations. So we've heard some interesting stories about that kind of workshopping going on.
Yeah, but it's just fascinating fertile ground and amazing. You think you're thinking far ahead when you're trying to come up with a world a century in advance. Actually, a lot of those creative steps, those scientific steps, are years away potentially, or certainly less than decades away. And you think you're being super smart and coming up with this crazy stuff, but it's the pace is accelerating. So who knows, if we have a genuine representation of what's going to go on in a century's time, it'll be maybe too far out for people to accept.
Yeah. Well, if we can, I want to do a little bit of a 180 here, and then, let's talk about not new technology. We had a fella on the show a few months ago, one of my favorite filmmakers, Phil Tippett. And do you know the work of Phil Tippett, Jamie?
Not well. I know Phil's name, but not the work well, I'm afraid.
So he would have done a lot of the animation for original Star Wars trilogy, and he would have been, actually there's an ongoing joke right now that he was the dinosaur supervisor in the Jurassic Park movies. So I guess he wasn't doing his job well, is the joke. But he was animating dinosaurs and doing stop animation. And he has a new film called it's been out this year, Mad God, which is completely animated. There's a little bit of live action, but it's all stop animation. It's all models. It's all real. And they're filming actual locations. In many ways, this reminds me of the work that your father did, and what you guys still are involved in bringing back the classic sci-fi. Is there, and something that reminds me of this kind of conversation that I'm trying to lead this to is some people don't want to download their music. They don't want an MP3. They want the vinyl. And what do you think? Is there an importance to this of us wanting to see something real? We want to see Marionation. We want to see an actual model of a ship fly across and know that it's on a string or that it's being pulled. Is there something that, what's the difference between the person that loves something that retro and that real and those models and those real things you're seeing, opposed to the computer graphics that we see everywhere now?
This is a can of worms and an area which I find myself in flux on. I'm kind of, I'll be doing the case for the defense and the prosecution on this particular thing, because I don't think there is a right answer. Obviously, a big driver is nostalgia. So there is a tangibility, a real world effect of physics, etc., on models, puppets, or whatever, that people who grew up watching those have learned to detect the kind of the perfect imperfection of those types of movement and physical pieces on camera. And those are quite clearly missing in CGI. But if you didn't grow up discovering those and kind of attuning your brain and eye to that type of filmmaking, then when you watch CGI now, it's not missing. So I think there's part of it is a nostalgic element of how your brain has been tuned in. Puppetry is a really interesting one because thanks to Team America, I think the most recent major international recognition of puppetry is, it's for comedy. It's got a ridiculous, heightened silliness to it, which is completely embedded in the public psyche. If you show them a clip from Thunderbirds and they don't know Thunderbirds, they will instantly go, it looks like Team America, every time. Wow. So culturally, it depends where you grew up, right? So in the UK, we're probably more accepting of human puppet characters for something dramatic than you would be in the US, for example, or in Japan, much more accepting of puppets in drama because it's so embedded in the culture versus, well, anywhere else in the world, really. And the further we go on, I think the less of an effect puppetry has in the culture, which is a shame because there is something really magical. Your brain out in the wild, hunter-gatherer days, is attuned to finding movement that appears conscious where it shouldn't be. So if you're walking down a track collecting berries or hunting or whatever, and a bush somewhere near to you moves in a strange way that suggests an animal might be hiding in it, your brain is wired to be alert for consciousness where it should not be. So I think watching puppets and watching puppetry is kind of enthralling because it speaks to that part of your brain that is looking for life in odd places. So I think that's one of the reasons it's so engaging. You get people who say, my favorite thing about Thunderbirds was the fact that you could see the strings. I think if it was really about that, then you wouldn't have enjoyed it because looking at strings is boring. It's not that. It's the way those things appeared to be brought to life and how within 60 seconds you would forget you were watching puppets. It's only in hindsight you go, it's because they were puppets. I think it runs far deeper than that. But in terms of the modern landscape, trying to pitch a puppet show for a global audience is really tough because of the cultural differences and things like Team America. So, puppets aside, I did tell you I'd be putting both sides of this case forward, right? I think the best thing to do is to use the best tool for the job. And if you have on a production, if you've got the budget for a maxiture, like, you know, a big miniature, then the experience of viewing will be all the better for it because of the perfect imperfection of movement, because the way everything moves in life is imperfect, the way a leaf blows randomly, you know, the way a car moves, and it will have a slight engineering imperfection in the way the tires are on, or the wheels are aligned, or the road surface, things which are so subtle and imperceptible you couldn't consciously point it out. But you put a technician in front of a computer trying to create those things, by virtue of trying to create the perfect imperfection, it's already too perfect. So I think there clearly are some effects sequences you cannot do on any reasonable budget with physical miniatures, with physical effects. It's just not possible to do. So the perfect spot for me is to look at what you're trying to achieve and take the best tools from the digital toolbox and from the practical toolbox, and then blend them together. And it's the blend now, which for me is the most effective.
Mm-hmm. For yourself and your father, were you inspired by works from Jim Henson, like the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth? Was that something that your father saw and went, wow? Or did he say, not really my thing, very different? And for yourself, is that something that is inspirational?
So there are so many might have been partnerships in Dad's career. Jim Henson is one of those. Gene Roddenberry is another. You know, he and Gene shared an entire bottle of whiskey, I'm told, at his office at Pinewood Studios many decades ago, with a mutual respect for each other's work. And Jim Henson in particular, you know, very different approaches to puppetry, but still trying to create that sense of, you know, things that shouldn't be alive brought to life in a really engaging and compelling way. So they were looking at working on a project together in the early mid-1980s, and it was only Jim's untimely death that brought that to a close. So, well, I wouldn't say inspired by, in Dad's case, and he certainly made a real thing of not watching other people's content too much for fear of being influenced by it. He would kind of maintain a bit of a distance. I think that there was a mutual respect there that could have inspired some amazing collaboration. And then, I mean, certainly for me, Dark Crystal is a good one. Certainly watched it multiple times as a kid. But you can take it from the kind of the sublime puppetry and style of Dark Crystal through to the perhaps sometimes a bit wobbly special effects models and sets of something like Doctor Who in the 1970s and 80s, which I also watched as a kid. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, it doesn't matter really for those, you know, you can enjoy them both because of the worlds they present. So it's again, we all have a tendency to get hung up on the way things were made. You know, it is the fact it was puppetry, it was the fact it was those Henson-esque creatures and the design or whatever. But I think at the core of it, so often it's the story and the characters that draw you in. It's why people have the characters that they identify with, and the stories, however fantastical and distant they are, there's something relatable. And we had a conversation with a guy at a convention a few years ago who said he had the most terrible childhood, and he was passed from place to place, from foster home to foster home. Couple of foster homes, he was abused, attacked, just the most miserable childhood. His favourite show was Captain Scarlet, because at the centre of Captain Scarlet was an indestructible man who, whatever he came up against, whatever terrible thing happened to him, he always came back every time. So it wasn't about the fact that show was made with puppets or the fact it had cool practical effects. It was this terrible war and this heroic character that drew this guy in. And he was in tears telling me this, and it was the most amazing thing to hear. So as much as the kind of technical, practical, visual side is inspiring, it's the story and the characters at the heart of it, which I think keep them timeless and perpetual.
Yeah.
It's the writing. The writing.
It's a huge thing, isn't it? Because you can make it look as beautiful as you like, but if the dialogue and the story are not compelling or are trashy or just plain crap, then you're not going to keep watching.
Well, you had mentioned, and sorry to circle back to this one, but you mentioned Team America, and I just briefly, was that flattering for you folks, or was it like those assholes? Like what was the immediate reaction when you found out about it and even saw pictures or whatever it was at first?
I don't think it was flattery or arseholery necessarily. The thought was, so Dad was making new Captain Scarlet, or it was in the early days, or maybe in pre-production on New Captain Scarlet, which was a CGI series, because he wanted to do the next thing with the next technology that was available, and they had a great motion capture unit at Pinewood, and he wanted to take Captain Scarlet a step forward. And although that CGI is now 17 years old, it holds up remarkably well because they were pushing things so far. So while he's doing his CGI thing and moving away from puppets, his office gets a call from Parker and Stone saying, "We'd love to have a chat with Mr. Anderson."
Oh, they approached? Parker and Stone approached?
Yeah. And he said to his line producer, who are they? Never heard of them. And they went, "Oh, they made the show South Park, Jerry. Oh, well, I better watch it before I speak to them."
Oh, no.
So I came home from school one day and to walk in to Dad watching South Park. So, he would have been 72 at this point. I'm like, why is my 72-year-old father watching South Park? Anyway, I won't turn the air blue, but what he said was not terribly favourable. And based on watching it, not getting it, not finding it funny, he never returned the call. So there are lots of people who say, oh, Team America, it's a love letter to those old shows, and it was because they loved the show so much. They don't really, as far as I know, neither of them really knew it at all. They'd seen clips and just thought, this thing's so ridiculous, we could do it this way, and it would be like so stupid it's funny. A lot of the people who ended up working on the film, they were huge fans, and to them it was a love letter in many ways. I watched the first, 15 minutes or so with Dad when it came out, or when it eventually we got a DVD copy of it. May not have even got that far, but it was the vomiting scene in the alleyway. When that was the point.
Well, that's like within 5 minutes, I think. Yeah, I haven't seen it in years, but
yeah. So that's how far he got before turning it off and saying, "I can't watch anymore." I think to some degree, the fact that your method that you developed has been parodied at that scale and to that degree was flattering, but it wasn't produced in a kind of, "Oh, we love this thing so much, it's a real nod to our production heroes." It was just this is a ridiculous way to make a film, and it was, but it was very, very effective. But I think it's permanently changed the landscape for puppetry and what it means to people.
Well, going to the other extreme, do you know this movie from 2004 called Strings by Anders Rono Klarland?
I don't think I do, Marty. No.
Well, you have to watch this. This is I saw that before I saw Team America. Oh, it came out at the same time. Now that I look at it, yeah. Also puppetry, but from Europe. I think from Norway, maybe, or Denmark.
Okay.
An amazing, deeply philosophical movie, with puppetry, where the puppets know that they're puppets, and it is in the real world of puppets, and they can't walk through doors, and they have strings, and the strings are kind of the metaphor for your spirit and your soul. Anyway, that's a great cure or balm for what happened with Team America. Instead, go watch that. Yeah.
But what an amazing contrast, though, and that speaks volumes of the cultural difference, right?
Yeah.
The US producing this thing which parodies puppets and kind of takes it to the most ridiculous level, while back in Europe, creating something philosophical, beautiful, elegant, thoughtful, and using the method for that. Two completely different elements crashing together there. And then that kind of illustrates perfectly, even though I had no idea of the film before, I'm ashamed to say, the different views from different cultures and why it then becomes so difficult to have something that is universally acceptable and successful that involves puppets.
Well, yeah, if we can recommend a couple to you, films that may interest you, mind you, Mad God is also quite grotesque. It's a little bit grotesque, but it's all puppets and animation, stop animation. Got to recommend that one to you, and then Strings for sure. Jamie, do you have any recommendations of science fiction books, film, television, anything that you're watching or reading that you'd like to pass along to us and our listeners?
I feel bad because I'm sure it will already have been recommended, and it's not as if the author has not had enough coverage in the world. But I did read Project Hail Mary, Andy Weir's book,
beautiful,
a few months ago, and I really enjoyed that. I'm not a kind of Andy acolyte by any means. I enjoyed The Martian, the book, the film less so. Didn't enjoy the moon-based one nearly
Artemis,
as much.
yeah.
I found that very difficult to kind of get into, but I thought Project Hail Mary was kind of beautiful and does speak to that utopian future. Yes, something bad is happening, but we're working to try and fix it. Yeah. And then the process of that, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but the otherworldly elements and how that interaction takes place, I thought was beautifully done and so much more creative than the usual, oh, hey, green, big-eyed aliens. It's very convenient you speak English. You know, it was a really enjoyable read, and I believe that's been optioned, and someone's gonna turn that into a feature. So I look forward to that being a slight disappointment compared to the book.
Yeah, but it really seemed like The Martian with much more. The plot, at least, right?
Yeah,
we read that for the book club, and we have an episode about it on Tales from the Bridge. Yeah, it's one of the very few, I think, slam dunk books for us all, where we were all just like, "That's amazing! We love this book." It has all the ingredients of like you say, sort of interesting, scientific too, but utopian science fiction. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh well, I'm glad we're on the same page there, gents. That was easy.
Yeah. No, it's a great pick. One of the best books of last year for sure, if not the best book.
Let me pass you back a little thing to look up. It's a short story by Andy Weir. The only short story I found by him. It's called The Egg. It's like maybe a page long, and it. I mean, I like to say that it's basically the what do you call it? The scripture for my family's religion, my family's science fiction religion. It just has it all. It's like so beautiful. So check that out, The Egg.
I'm going to look it up. I mean, you guys have just filled up all my free time for the next 3 weeks now. So thanks.
Yeah. Nice. And one more little throwback to a guest we had on our show was, I'm not sure if you would know this gentleman, but David Menken. We got to talk to him. I actually had him on another show that we produce, and he did the voice of Gordon Tracy, I believe, in Thunderbirds Are Go.
ITV's New Thunderbirds, yes. Yeah. No, David's one of those names that pops up all the time as one of our kind of ubiquitous voice artists, because he's great with the accents and animation voices and stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, we had him on another show that I do, which is a trivia show, which we have guests on and ask them questions, and we had him on with Joseph Marcel.
Nice.
Who, you know Joseph Marcel?
Yeah.
And one of the questions we asked him was a Thunderbirds trivia, and it was pretty neat to see Joseph Marcel do the marionette move that you said at the beginning is what people do when you identify
that.
Yeah, every time.
I had every year of my school life, every day of my school life from 7 to 18 had somebody doing that. So I'm very familiar with it.
It's a friendly handshake. I would hope.
It's a knowing nod to a shared pleasure. We hope
for sure. Is there anything else that our listeners should know about JerryAnderson.com or or what's to come? Because I know we've got that UFO book that just came out. Anything else you want to share, Jamie?
UFO book's coming. There's another book called Maybe There, The Lost Stories of Space 1999, which is written by Robert Wood and David Hirsch, who are long-time Space 1999 fans and authorities on the show. And they've basically taken a load of draft scripts before they became the shooting scripts and novelized them. So you've got the 3 different approaches to break away the opening story and how that might have been, as well as an unmade story, a few others. It's like kind of an exploration of a parallel universe for Space 1999. So I think that's going to be a nice way to people to further enjoy the worlds of Space 1999. And really just that, you know, all I'm trying to do is celebrate everything that was, but also push towards the future. So we're doing new content all the time, pushing to kind of bring back the Anderson-esque utopian series feature, and there's things in various stages of development and funding and beyond. So that's the main thing. So if you enjoyed Anderson, it's not just about the show you grew up with. There's loads of others too, and there's more Anderson-esque stuff coming as well. So
amazing.
You know, it's the British Walt Disney, the British DC, the British Marvel, as far as I'm concerned, and so I think it should be treated thusly.
Cool.
Amazing. And then our listeners can follow you on Twitter. What is your Twitter handle there, Jamie?
I'm Jamie Anderson.
Excellent.
I am Jamie Anderson, yes. Don't follow Jamie Anderson, the Olympic female snowboarder, or do if you like, but maybe don't ask her about Thunderbirds in Space 1999.
I'm doing that. Loved you and Thunderbirds. Awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you so much. It was a delight speaking to you, and love the work you're doing now and the legacy you're continuing. I'm such a fan, so it's a real treat to talk to you, and we appreciate the time. And
yeah, it's always nice just to chat about all things Anderson beyond just what was your favorite Thunderbirds vehicle, because there's so much more to it. So a really good chat. Thank you, gents.
thank you for joining us, Jamie. That was fantastic. We really appreciate the stories and the time you took. Listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed that as well. Please like, subscribe, follow the show, send us emails, let us know what's up, follow us on Twitter. We want to hear from you. Thank you for listening to Tales from the Bridge. Until next time.